Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of The Examined Life. This morning, I want to take some time, and seeing that it is the 11th of November and Veterans Day, I wanted to discuss and give a tribute to those who have served our country, and also, I would say, discuss an overarching element of what service entails and the types of human conflict that result in the necessity to have individuals who serve, even now in the 21st century when everything seems so taken care of and clean and tidy. I did a 6-year stint in the reserves. I have a sibling who is high level in special operations, and I have a couple close friends who are also high level in special operations. And there's, as a caveat, there's definitely a difference in my mind between the different striations in service, whether that's serving in the reserves or serving active duty combat arms, and then serving active duty infantry, and then special operations, just in terms of the amount that you're giving as a person. So I just think I want to take a couple minutes and really recognize with a spirit of thankfulness, because notwithstanding your opinion on the fruits of the United States military and the efficacy of it and the allocation of resources towards it and the integrity of use therein, just the military-industrial complex, just in the deconstruction phase that we are in. I feel like as a generation, it's common to, unless you are in a family of service members or have served yourself, it's common to really feel disconnected from the necessity, I think, of a military force and from the human sacrifice that is involved in participating in that military force. So I'm not trying to dismiss today that there is elements of change that are necessary in our military and the way that we allocate funding to it, and just a lot of the waste, both of human potential and material potential that is involved in our military. I don't want to dismiss that, but I want to focus, perhaps again with imbalance holistically, but today, as it's Veterans Day, I want to focus on the human sacrifice, and I just want to do the best that I can to draw out of myself a sense of appreciation, and then also out of my listeners a sense of appreciation for the time, energy, effort, psychological difficulty, etc., that goes into giving your whole life to a country through its military. And as I mentioned, there's a difference in my mind between, like, I myself was in the reserves. I never deployed. But my brother he's active duty. He has multiple kids, and he's deployed multiple times, and their family is oriented around it. And I think it's a strong human step to be able to do something that is so consuming in your life without all of the reasons written on paper in front of you. And then that goes back to what I was saying with relation to the critiques that you could make, I think, of the military and of the United States in general. But the fact is that we stand able to make these types of critiques and to think freely and to communicate freely because we have a strong base of individuals willing to sacrifice for our national security. The prerequisite to critique our country is because it's safe, is because we have developed ourselves. Maybe some of it wasn't through good means. In the United States, history is rife with abuse, but at its core philosophy, as I mentioned in the past, the United States, in some sense, has risen above other countries in its care for the rights of individuals and its embodiment of the leading minds philosophically, embodiment of those rights in individuals. So the reason that we now are at this place in 2022, in the middle of America, and the conversation is predominantly criticizing much of America and those who have served it and who currently serve it, and I'm not dismissing that, but it's important to recognize that the reason we can even do that is because there are millions of American men and women who have sacrificed their entire lives and much of their time and much of their energy in their entire lives for our own safety, so that we can be a beacon. And again, I'm using all these terms that are kind of simplistic, but it's true. Like, and getting back to what I was saying about, I appreciate service members who are able to sign their life away, in effect, for a purpose that's not entirely defined, for a purpose that's not perfect, to take a step and say, okay, this is a type of meaning in my life that I'm willing to embrace, even though there are negative aspects to it that are currently being conversed regarding. And I think a perfect example of that is in Vietnam. The individuals who sacrificed their lives, many obviously didn't want to, but many did. But it's the nature of our fighting force that when duty comes down the line, it's not questioned at that moment. It's, okay, this is what we have to do, and this is what we're going to do. So we ship off to Vietnam, to a place that is merely a proxy for a potential ideological clash. And we're there for 8 to 10 years, and hundreds of thousands of both American and Vietnamese individuals died in that war. But there was still, looking at it from a human perspective, countless sacrifices that were made. And again, I see that in my friends and in my family who serve, and I just want to appreciate that. In long form conversation this morning, I want to appreciate the toll it takes on their families and on their friends and on their communities, because again, I wouldn't be here were it not for them. You wouldn't be, if you're an American listening to this, or if you're any country flourishing, especially in the West, you wouldn't be where you are at with your ability to think like you can think without soldiers and men and women who have gone before you and who are serving contemporary with you, creating and crafting that right as we speak. So all of my honor and everything associated and equivalent with that term goes out now towards those individuals. And especially approaching it today from a place of comfort. I know when I had a hard time personally serving. There was a lot of internal dissonance because life in the immediate is so comfortable and there's so much freedom to flesh out and think about what I want to do with my life and what feels right to me, And the decision to serve full time, in some sense, is throwing off a lot of the control that you have over your life and over its direction. It's certainly throwing off, especially combat arms, the comforts of life. It's quite uncomfortable to live your life in a third world country for a year, or to live it in a field, or to ruck 50 miles a day for 3 months, or depending on what type of training you're doing. It's a discomfort that most people would run from, and most people do run from by the statistics. So especially our generation, those who serve, deserve a lot of credit because it's not as socially expected. And again, there's a lot of criticism revolving around the United States military. So to just be able to take the mantle and to push forward and to say, no, I believe, notwithstanding its faults, I believe in the future of our country, in the necessity for it on the world stage, for its health on the world stage, and I'm going to take the mantle and I'm going to push forward and I'm going to serve. I can't say that I appreciate it enough. And I think we can really let it broaden our perspective some too, because again, we can get caught in this myriad of thoughts and ideas, and the internet really exposes those, because all you can do online is communicate and think. You don't actually act. And action is so much of human life. It's so much of our thought. A lot of times action is the prerequisite to the thought that follows. So to have a day like Veterans Day, where we can look at individuals who predominantly live their lives through action, which again, as I said, is not as common today, and they let what falls behind fall behind, and they do their best. Speaking of the idyllic service member, that is, they do their best to embody the highest values and principles that have been imbued into them from a young age, or that they picked up throughout their life, as they do an incredibly difficult task of perhaps violently defending the good and ethical and moral rights that our country seeks to uphold through its constitution and through its system of leadership. And you can see the horrors of war even now. It's strange. In 2022, I've never lived through a conventional war like we see in Ukraine. And when I say lived through, I mean be on the globe while it's happening, even if I'm not necessarily close to it, which I'm not. But you see through articles, photos, videos, reports in Ukraine, the true horrors of war. And I think it's important that we don't sequester war away from what it actually is to be a human today. And I apologize if I sound preachy this episode. I'm not trying to preach. I'm trying to, in some sense, process this myself and give full honor myself. So I'm putting myself with my listeners. So if I do sound preachy, that's why. But it's important that we don't sequester away the horrors of war as something other than human, because the reality is that I think much of our current day difficulties can be better understood if we allow contemplation that within every human being is the possibility for the utmost good and the most treacherous evil. It's within, and Viktor Frankl wrote about that in Man's Search for Meaning, the recognition that inside of every person, and other contemporaries with Viktor Frankl, inside of every person is the possibility for tremendous good and tumultuous evil. I believe, I don't quite remember the book that I read, but it follows a police battalion in World War II, ordinary men, and it just documents the transition over time of a seemingly complacent or at least docile person to a horrific individual who is willing to murder a pregnant woman. And it's just the trend of society can greatly affect mankind. And right now we're so sequestered from much of the material difficulty that life can afford that we don't often, or at least I don't often contemplate that inside. Probably not true. I do think about this a lot. That inside there's so much potential for everything, even if you don't want to use terms like good and evil, for everything that individuals would at least agree does the least to enhance well-being. So war, if you pay close attention to it, and Veterans Day, I think, is a good opportunity for those of us who maybe don't think about it much to pay close attention to it, really should allow you to reflect on yourself and say, how can this happen? And realize that if I were in shoes relevant to a conflict such as in Russia and Ukraine, how would I respond? I'd like to think that I would take the mantle, similar to our service members today. I would take the mantle for, as best as I can discern, a right reaction to good consciousness, to my convictions. I wouldn't compromise on those convictions for the sake of my material surroundings or others' affect on me. But just think through that as I talk about this today. Just think about how you can pay attention to conflicts and really learn about yourself, even as you do your best, hopefully, to do all we can to support as best as we can discern the right side. Because if anything, the evil side of humanity is the strongest argument that there is meaning in life. And I keep coming back to that because as the examined life thinker, I think finding a meaning is at its core, at the core to that type of life. And when you examine the less good elements of humanity, the evil sides of humanity, that's the strongest argument in a lot of ways, that there is a meaning to life, in that meaning is how can we do our best to not be that whatever, that evil, that horrible element of humanity and human existence. How can we not do that? So it's a wake-up call and a recognition that there is a reason to live war in a strange sense. And our service members, even if it's not fully fleshed out, embody that, in that they're protecting a bastion of good. If you'll grant me the ability and the wherewithal to say that the United States is a bastion of good. And I think overall I do believe that, just based on its history relative to other countries and what humans tend to do with the amount of power that we've had vested. By we, I just mean our nation state. So I wanted to close in a similar air. I wanted to read a quote, actually, from Viktor Frankl. He wrote a book, Man's Search for Meaning, during the Holocaust. He was a Jewish psychologist, and what got him through, in some sense, the concentration camp was his ability to reflect deeply on his writings, on his work, on his manuscripts, and to observe people around him and say, what is meaning And how can meaning help you transcend difficulty? And how can meaning help you suffer life well? I'm going to read this quote, and then I'm going to finish with it. This is, again, just a recognition that he had while in the trenches, so to speak, of the concentration camp. For the first time in my life, I saw the truth as it is set into song by so many poets, proclaimed as the final wisdom by so many thinkers. The truth that love is the ultimate and highest goal to which man can aspire. And then I grasped the meaning of the greatest secret that human poetry and human thought and belief have to impart. The salvation of man is through love and in love. And then this quote, it did not really matter what we expected from life, but rather what life expected from us. We needed to stop asking about the meaning of life and instead to think of ourselves as those who are being questioned by life daily and hourly. Our answer must consist not in talk and meditation, but in right action and in right conduct. Life ultimately means taking the responsibility to find the right answer to its problems and to fulfill the tasks which it constantly sets for each individual. So war and serving your country in war draws you out of yourself in such a manner that perhaps the tumultuous arguments regarding what feels right, that my feelings should be tolerated, and I don't want to dismiss that, but I want to balance it with the caveat that war and service in life imposing a certain act upon you as a response to it is meaning, and that's healthy. And we're doing ourselves a disservice. I'm doing myself a disservice when I fail to recognize that it's not all about me, and it's not all about what I want to do. It's mostly about how I respond to what life as an ethereal other pushes upon me, about what it causes me to suffer, and suffer just in the broad sense, not necessarily negative, not necessarily positive. We all just suffer life by the very meaning of that term. In arguably one of the worst situations in the 21st century, or the 20th century, Viktor Frankl discerned that those who withstood the difficulty the best were those who had a deep meaning in life. And I hesitate to say transcendent, but in the sense that it transcended the current circumstance, yes, a transcendent meaning in life. So our service members are allowing us to continue to think like this. They're allowing us to continue to interact like this, and they're acting this out to some extent. They're acting out an active response to what life throws at them. And they're doing it at the expense of the ability to sit back and comfortably analyze and rationalize and determine what is the best way forward for me. No, they're saying, what is the best way forward for this body of people who, by my very action, I am determining to love, even if there's disagreements ideologically, culturally, socially. Their very action of shouldering the weight of serving in armed conflicts is an act of love and care, and it is a response, a positive response to life's true impositions, when you really think holistically about all the possible impositions that life can have, which, again, it could be war, it can be plenty, it can be famine, it can be a good social structure, it can be none at all, it can be an amazing family, it can be a foster kid until you're 16 and emancipated. There's a wide panoply of possibilities, but I strive to be in my life, and I think we should all strive to be emblematic of the American service member who shoulders it no matter what the cost. So I wanted to close with that, and I think it's just worth reflecting today. Think through people you might know, and certainly reach out. I'm going to do the same, and I appreciate everyone listening, and I'll talk to you on Monday.